Dwayne. A little bit about Dwayne. Born and raised on the south side of Chicago, currently based in Nashville, Tennessee. Former USAG gymnastics coach. I really wish we had more time to go into that, Dwayne. And was a touring dancer for years, but now only dances from the waist up while driving alone. DIY carpenter, believer that food is best when it's spicy, husband of going on 15 years to Rachel, father of 2 beautiful girls, Ren and Lark. You want to say a quick hi, Dwayne?
How's it going, everybody? Again, I thought I would be a little bit better at keeping the emotions at bay, but man, just seeing the film again has been impactful for me again, and then just seeing all these names over here in the comment section, I'm completely blown away by what's happening tonight and what's happening in our country as a whole, and what potentially happens because of all of you gorgeous humans that are here with the heart to help make a change out there. So yeah, I can't say thank you enough, everyone.
Thank you, Dwayne. And I'd be remiss not to introduce our pastor, David Plant. A little bit about David, even if you go to Storefront, there's maybe some information that you don't know about him. David has called DC, Seattle, and Hawaii home. He's now lived in New York City for the last 20 years. And like most pastors, he met his wife, Susan, in a bar downtown while he was bartending. After 14 years on staff at Redeemer Presbyterian Church of New York City, Susan and David committed to planting a new church in their neighborhood, and Storefront Church began, as we mentioned, during COVID over Zoom. David, want to say a quick hi?
Hi, I'm so glad to see everybody here and see faces that I've not seen in a while, but get to see some new ones too. So thank you. And of course, thanks to Dwayne for being with us, for sharing with us.
Okay, you guys ready to get started in this conversation?
Sure.
We'll start gently, and I'll start with you, David. Just a simple question. Why were you actually interested in hosting this conversation for Storefront?
Yeah, well, after watching this film, and maybe that is self-evident, you know, obviously the content of the film is quite challenging, quite powerful, but the quality of the film is something to recognize as well. You know, it's a heartbreakingly beautiful film. And so, you know, as I think about the ecosystem in which we're doing ministry here in West Chelsea to this diverse community of people, it just, I know that this is a community that your film would resonate with, and it fits right in with our mission and our purpose. So, you know, it's the quality, it's the content, but also there's a tremendous amount of conviction for us as a church around this subject matter. And for me personally, you know, like a lot of Americans, we know our family history, and know that people that we love or people that we've been related to have their lives have been immersed in pretty sinful racist practice. And so personally, there's some conviction around me in terms of redemption, but also as a pastor in a particular denomination, you know, there is a real conviction, you know, insofar as I'm being true to my calling. Our denomination has been pretty public about its racist roots and pretty public about confessing and repenting over overt racism and repenting over their complicity and their silence during the civil rights movement in the years since then. And so I think it was in 2017, there was a very public confession and repentance. And so insofar as I am true to my calling within this denomination, I will always be having this conversation around race equity and deconstructing whiteness and white supremacy, so that race equity is just constantly being pursued as part of the gospel. So that's why.
Awesome. Yeah. And Dwayne, if I was to ask you, like, why you'd be interested in actually having a conversation with the church?
Man, the specifically being interested in having this conversation with the church, just on the very surface level, identifying as a Christian, and feeling as though I think there's that that thing that's quite relatable, where if any of you have family members or friends and you've kind of been caught in that moment where you look around and realize, oh my gosh, like this has become pervasive amongst those that I love. And so there's that. Then I think there's also just the ideas that as people that claim to be Christians, we should be front runners in this fight. I think also there's this very pressing feeling that right now there are a lot of people that are going to see the church as being on the wrong side of history. Here and now, there are a lot of people that potentially look back at some injustices that were done to people throughout history and would say to themselves, if I were there, I would have really taken a stand. But here we are, and the church as the entity of people that are really supposed to be in this fight, I think have potentially made an impression that's going to be a really lasting negative one as a whole. And again, I have to be careful not to stereotype the church either, but I do think that there's more that the Christian body can do. And I think there's also this this thing that's happened with politics, where it's almost if you were to be lined up and given this option, hey, like you've got to be on one of these two teams and pick this jersey. It's like, okay, I guess I'll take the green jersey. And then there's this hammer that hits you where it's, all right, now that you've taken the green jersey, you like that we like basketball, so you've got to like basketball. We like football, you've got to like football. We also like racism, so you got to like racism. And there's this moment where you're like, well, hang on. Like, I was cool with the basketball and football thing, but what about this racism thing? Well, you got on the green jersey. Like, you got on the green jersey. And you can't take it off because or else you'll be wearing that purple jersey. So, you don't want that. And there's this thing that's happened where partisanship and political affiliation has turned into this buy-in of everything that team represents. And it's kind of silent. It has silenced a lot of what Christianity is supposed to be about because of these political affiliations. And so I think there's also the hope to speak with churches about how we can undo that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. David, do you want to respond to that at all?
Yeah, no, I what I've always loved about the gospel and coming to faith, as an adult, was it began. I was going to say it exploded, but the reality is that it began to, over time, erode. The reality that you have to fit into one of these two, you have to wear one of these two jerseys, and that the gospel really demands a third way, so that whatever jersey you're putting on, to use your metaphor, that you openly, actively challenge those things that are contrary to Christ. And so I do think that part of the Christian witness is to be countercultural. No matter what, obviously, no matter what political affiliation you're in or what jersey you wear,
Yeah. Dwayne, the film is just so powerful. Your story is really, really powerful. And so I just wondered, what made you choose film as your medium to share your story? And how does, you mentioned that you are a man of faith. Like, how did faith play into the making of this film?
So I think the motivation for making the film was, as I've grown and matured, I initially had this very negative opinion of people that involve themselves with civil rights issues, mainly because my father was just a guy that ate, slept, breathed. That's all he cared about, was the plight of the Black man. And boy, did he just hit us over the head with a hammer with this stuff in the very few times that we saw him, which certainly didn't help his argument very much. He's an absent father. This is a man that was by no stretch of the imagination a good man. I mean, he's a man that went on to do some really like horrific things in his life. If I could just continue to be honest with you guys, and I think one of my sisters is here with me of a different father, but this is a man that raped my sister. So to hear anything coming from him was very easily dismissive. But as I've gotten older, and as I kind of grew in my relationship with what I would define as my relationship with God, I began to take on this feeling of responsibility to make the world a better place than I found it. And man, the more and more I looked around, I began to feel like I was in this alternate reality where I was seeing things happening in front of me and beginning to ask these questions of, why does that look the way that it looks? And why is that happening? Why is this the perception? And you begin to unpack that. You do some research, and the answers are very clear with some digging. But then you continue to look around, and it's like, I am in the twilight zone. Like, why is this not common sense? And why is this so difficult for us to all get on the same page with this? So I think Black Thoughts kind of came about as an overflow of that state of being, of feeling like it just, for me personally, I just reached the tipping point of being able to watch without action. And there's certainly a struggle from a standpoint of, is this something that a Christian is supposed to do? Is it right for a Christian to take up the very specific fight of fighting against racism? And it reminds me of the story of this painter that painted all these beautiful paintings, and he'd put a cross in it somewhere, and he was able to sell it in a church. And then one day he decided, what if it's just a gorgeous landscape? And he went to try to sell those through the same avenues, and people confronted him and said, well, where's the cross? And where's the picture of Jesus? And for me, it was kind of that same wrestling of, if it doesn't blatantly have this Jesus stamp slapped on it, is it right for me to do? And so I had to really do some searching through things, and I think other people that identify with Christians would somewhat understand the struggle, because there's this concept that we are to make the world better through things in the spiritual realm. Things that are happening very naturally on the earth will inevitably, through trickle-down effect, get fixed because we are attacking things in a spiritual standpoint. But then there's this practical side of things about faith and works and things like that. And so I started to dig back into scriptures again, and there's some scriptures that just really, really, really just made it blatantly clear. There's scriptures that specifically say, speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, speak up and judge fairly, defend the rights of the poor and the needy, defend the oppressed. It says, woe to those who make unjust laws, who issue oppressive decrees. There's scriptures, I think the one that really gets me is, was it Isaiah 58? Where it says, is not this the kind of fasting I've chosen, to loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, and to set the oppressed free? And when you look at that, it's not a mystery anymore. It's like, this is this is essentially what God has asked us to do. This is ministry. And so I think at the end of the day, I realized that it was incredibly clear that I had a duty to act. And, you know, this film was one of those ways that I expressed that duty.
Yeah, you know, if I can just jump in, you know, I really appreciate, you know, we're just getting to know each other, but the idea, what I'm hearing from you is that you were called to act in a way that was a little uncomfortable for you. You know, and I think about, you know, in Jesus, he holds three offices perfectly, right? The prophet, the priest, and the king. And we all hold those offices to some degree. And one of those offices maybe we feel super comfortable in. But I think when it comes to certain issues in our culture, where we're called to speak into it, we're often going to be called into exercising, you know, maybe if you know, feel more priestly in one way, but in this area, we're called to be more prophetic. We're called to stretch ourselves, to challenge ourselves. And, you know, I don't know if that's super practical for all of us to like, it's not, is it specific enough? But I do think those categories are helpful for me for me to begin to think, how am I going to exercise the agency that God has given me? Am I going to only use this priestly lane that feels comfortable, or only use the kingly lane that feels really natural for me and life-giving for me? Or am I going to challenge myself and actually be prophetic and call out truth? So, you know, I get the sense from your film, and I'd love to just talk about how we experience your film, but you've clearly been prophetic in this, you know, and it sounds like you've answered the call that you've been reading about in the passages.
Man, trying to.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like such a massive ask.
Yeah.
Film is referred to as a mountain. And the more and more you dig into the issues surrounding racism in America, the more it feels like a mountain. And the more you realize that there are these two versions of racism that we've got to deal with. There's this racism of the heart, and trying to change people's hearts. And then there's this institutional side of it. And it's like you realize that it's such a well-built machine. And it was built so intentionally.
Mm-hmm.
There's this pessimism sometimes that sets in, and it's like, it's just too much. It's just too big.
Yeah. You know what I love just listening to you? Can I interrupt? I'm sorry.
Absolutely.
We live in a time where there's just so much good content on this topic. So many good books, so many good articles, incredible movies. But, you know, as I watching Black Thoughts, I think what you've provided is actually something very unique. I don't know that there's anything quite like it in the culture. It is a real abstract, but clear film on race, you know, systemic injustice and race here in America. And even just listening to you talk, you're a unique voice and a unique dialogue partner. And you're a unique storyteller. You know, watching this film, this is the first time I've watched it with anybody except for, you know, I've watched it a few times. It's the first time I've watched it with an audience or with people, and it landed on me a lot more different. You know, it really impacted me. And, you know, I knew that it was courageous for you to do this film, but to sit and watch you watching it too. You just have my respect. So thank you for being an artist and a faithful follower of Jesus. I think just talking about the film a little bit, what I love about it is it's an American story. It's a classic American story. And, you know, I told you earlier, it reminds me a lot of Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman. And in the sense, very different stories in one sense, but they're both about men who are being crushed by the American dream and the impossibility of achieving it. And, you know, Arthur, that play is all about, supposed to take place within the mind of Willy Loman. And it's a very disorienting play. None of it is linear. You know, the original set design for that play was meant to be built. It was meant to resemble a human skull, so that the whole thing lives within his head. And to experience your film is not that different. It's very disorienting, overwhelming, exhausting, and very clear. And so I just thought it was really powerful in that sense. As just a American story put to film. I think secondly, I was just really moved by it because of the specificity of your storytelling. And maybe that's really helpful for all of us practically as we talk about this, to really take the kind of time that Dwayne has put into telling the our stories with race with real specificity. And so your reality really spoke to my reality. And the way that you talked about not wanting to take your shirt off as you mowed your lawn out of, you know, what I sensed was a fear of appearing aggressive. All those kinds of details really just bring this story to life, and it speaks to my reality. So it's like a dialogue that we've been having silently for years. But you're now finally putting it to words.
Okay, that means so much. Like just like hearing that feedback, and that there are moments in the film that specifically resonate with people differently. And just thinking about that moment that you touched on there, something as simple as going out to mow the lawn. I think there's so many ways that people could interpret that. And I touch on that really briefly in the film, where you hear people say, "Oh, you just shouldn't care what people think." Like, come on, Dwayne, like, take your shirt off. Who cares? Like, show that dad bod. Nobody cares. But I think there's also this reality that because the system has become so pervasive, it creates this very invisible, ever-present need for decision making and the evaluation of how those decisions will affect me, my family, my future. And there's so many Black scholars and people that have written about the Black experience in America that describe that as an ever-present prison. James Baldwin said something that was so profound, and I think it's an answer to when people ask the question of what do Black people want? What do you guys want? He said something really beautiful. He said, what I would like is freedom, is for people to just be out of my way and to be out of my mind. And there's this idea that if we just take that freedom, you just wake up tomorrow and just say to yourself, I'm just not going to care anymore. That is an option. It does not eliminate the cost of those options. And so if I wake up tomorrow and just say, well, I just don't care anymore. I'm going for a walk in this outfit with this hat, and I'm going to turn it backwards because that helps me see when I'm jogging, it increases the visibility. And if that HOA president sees me and decides to pick up the phone, it doesn't mean that I wasn't free to make those decisions. It just means that there are real life consequences for those decisions. And I think at the end of the day, what we're really hoping for is to be able to live in a world where those negative consequences for just being, just existing, don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And it's liberty, not only in the ways that I think we would normally think of liberty, but liberty of the mind to just exist. And I hope that comes across.
Yeah, it did. Shantz?
Yeah, no, I think I just absorbed in the conversation. Um, when there was just so much to unpack in the film.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm just wondering, like, are there key things that you wanted viewers to leave with, from your film, like that we could take away and just really reflect on?
Oh man. I think each part of the film kind of touches on, they're almost like chapters in a book, and they all touch on so many different aspects of the Black experience in America. And I think on the top of the list of takeaways, I hope that people will, one, realize that I'm just one Black man in this country and I can't speak for them all. That my experiences don't look like the experience of the next Black man that you may have a conversation with. And in that line of thinking, hopefully this film helps rehumanize Black men, Black women, Black children, that they can be their own individual humans. They're not lumped together in this monolithic group. It reminds me of something that the potential president to be said, where you're not Black if you don't vote for me. It's just that this idea that we all just fall under this very easy to define category. So I hope that comes across, that we can kind of break apart this idea that being colorblind and not seeing color is actually the opposite direction of where we want to go, that we do want to see color. We do want to see ethnicity. We do want to see history and context of people. And if we see the history and the context of people on an individual basis, allows us to appreciate them. If we can appreciate them with context, then they have room to move toward that freedom that we were just talking about earlier. I think there's also the more pen and paper sort of an approach to the film, where hopefully there's some tidbits of history that people can latch onto in some of those sections, and then go back and do some more digging, especially toward the end of the film. I felt like we just started to I was running out of time and didn't want to go over 30 minutes. And so there's some things that pop up and go away very quickly toward the end of the film that I hope people are curious enough to look into more themselves. But I think overall, I hope that the film becomes a conversational piece, something that prompts conversations like these, something that helps conversations that people may have with loved ones, with coworkers. Man, there's the list of hopes for the film is so long. It's just so incredibly long. More than anything, I suppose I hope that it somehow makes a dent in again, that massive mountain that we're trying to chip away at.
Yeah, that's actually a really nice segue into my next question, Dwayne, because I think there's a lot of New Yorkers who joined the call, and about 40% of our questions were specifically around, so what should we do? What are the conversations that we should be having? So the kind of like the call to action from, having these conversations. How should we be thinking about next steps as an individual, as a nation, as a church? So yeah, definitely one of the most popular questions that came up from the folks here. If I could just ask you, maybe just what conversation should we actually be having as a start?
And those are fantastic questions, because I think most people here are here because they're asking themselves, what can I do, and what does that look like? And I think also, especially particularly I'm a former gymnastics coach, and one of the things that would bother me tremendously is when you see a kid, an athlete working very, very hard toward getting skill, and then you hear coaches yell out these very generalized sorts of coaching tidbits like run faster, catch it, go harder. And it's like, well, what is the practical side of what you're telling me? Like, how do I catch it? What is the how? So I'm really glad that that question has continued to come up. And I think from a practical standpoint, to go back to something we touched on earlier, it starts with having to make sure that we've got really, really great roots in what racism is. I think from there, we've got to understand that racism, again, is tackled in two different sectors that are very, very different from each other. I've heard a lot of statements about, hey, if we just come to love each other, then it all goes away. And coming to love each other is definitely a part of it. I think, especially biblically, there's a very, 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 very clear mandate to place others before ourselves. And I think that's how we begin to attack the type of racism that is a racism of the heart. I think that a lot of people live in these bubbles where we don't really interact with or engage with people that are outside of those life bubbles. Racism and ignorance and hatred thrives in that way. And so one of the very practical things we can do is actually put our money where our mouth is in actions and get outside of those bubbles and get out into the communities that are around us and begin to engage with people around us that don't look like us, begin to have conversations with those people. And I think begin acts of service with people that may not look like us. And I think in those acts of service, what we can begin to do is to find out, hey, well, what gifts has God given me? What am I good at? What sorts of skills do I have? In doing that and thinking about what those skills are and what those gifts are that you may have, figure out how you can use those gifts as acts of service in communities or with coworkers or with the neighbor next door. And then we really begin to carry out what it is that Christ is asked us to do, which is to go and be the Good Samaritan. And in being the Good Samaritan, and I think what we end up doing is loosening the really tight grip that racism has on us that thrives in selfishness and in this idea that it's about me versus them, me over the rest. It's about me, about me, about me, about me. And so in acts of service, we then begin to rip apart this very core of racism that thrives on self. So I think that's one thing that we can do. And then you get into the institutional side of racism that I don't think can even be addressed until we start with the thing that we were just talking about how we connect from human to human, how we interact on a very personal, on a very heart level that undoes some of these ideas that come about because of racism. And once we can get there, once we can learn to fall in love with other people, then from their eyes and through their lenses and learning what it really looks like to walk in their shoes, then we can take a look at institutional racism and actually care about it enough to do something about it, because it is a monster of an issue. And one of the things that will happen very quickly is people will just, once you really see how institutional it is, you throw your hands up and say, it's too much to do. But if you have fallen in love with other people, with your neighbor, with a coworker, if you've gone and gotten into the soup kitchens and your heart begins to break for the gentleman that you had a great conversation with, and you've gone and you've gotten into some community service moments because you're using your skills to give back, and you begin to connect with people, and then you see the things that actually disenfranchise them. Now you've got the right eyes to look at institutional racism with. And from that point, partnering up with people that help us understand how to disassemble institutional racism. There's the ACLU. There's hopefully there are blossoming programs like that in communities across the globe that help understand policy, legislation, along with ways that from past to present, our government and institutions in society have helped uphold racism. And then we can take some of those practical steps at joining with them, whether it be opening up the pocketbook and simply donating to some of those organizations, or we can be boots on the ground, which is a lot harder to do, but it's certainly necessary when it's necessary to just grab a Sharpie and make a sign the size of Texas and get out in the streets and hold that thing up. All of those things make a difference, but I don't know that we can address any of it without kind of going through the very specific sort of a process of checking heart first, by connecting with people. After connecting with people, there's the education that happens from connecting with people, bouncing from there to hopefully engaging in education ourselves. There's so many wonderful resources, like you mentioned, David, out there that touch on this, which then takes a very much needed weight off of I hate to say this, but off of the one Black friend that a lot of people have to educate them. It takes some of that weight off of them. So fall in love with people, figure out where that education can begin, start the voyage of education. From the voyage of education, finding out how to partner with groups that are decoding the legislative issues that we face and figuring out how to change some of those legislative things. I know that's a lot.
It's so good.
Good.
So good. Yeah. You know, this work is so long and hard. And, you know, I guess what you're saying is unless there's a heart transformation, yeah, you need that to be able to assist with this work. David, I have a hard question for you.
Yeah.
Is that okay? Turn the attention to you. So my question is, what has it been like as a white man leading a church that's committed to racial justice?
I think I probably have a better answer for you in 5 years. You know, we're a new church, so I think in 5 years we'll have a lot more wisdom, a lot more nuance, a lot more anecdotal evidence, and probably a lot more, even more conviction than we do now. But I do think it's pretty liberating to just engage and stumble forward. And not avoid or try and rationalize that there are other things that you can put your time and energy into. So it's been really great to do that. And it's also really great because this is true of every aspect of ministry, but this is one where you can't, as a white man, be blinded by hubris, because you know, I can't. We just have so much to learn, and therefore it's great to be able to have a body of you know, people around you who you can learn from. So, you know, this movie came to us because Bertha brought it to us, and we were all like-minded enough and trusted each other enough to listen and to know that if she's bringing something to us, then it's probably worth her time and attention, and it certainly was, right? And so I guess in that sense, it's been really, really liberating. We're probably not doing all the right things. But I think, one of the things, and we don't do that in most of the things, but, as part of the leadership team, we're often just saying, well, I think we can sleep well at night because we're entering into hard spaces that we're just not comfortable with, but we think God is pleased. And that's what's most important. And I think too, the danger for all of us probably, and maybe especially for me, is people are going to give people in leadership more credit than they actually deserve for doing things like this. And therefore I think that's pretty dangerous. And so I just need to be aware of that. And this is such a, I don't know if I need to explain that much more, but I think it's just this is something that we feel called and convicted by. And, there's no better way to spend our time and energy. Yeah.
I've got one final question before I open it up to everyone else, and this is for both of you. There's, as you know, either within the church or even in the media, just a lot of calls for unity. And that hasn't sat so well with certain folks. And, there's a lot of kind of differing opinions around that. And I'd love to kind of just ask both of you, like, what does that look like for you? So that's my question. What does that look like for you? Even possible?
Man, I think for me, there are quite a few things in mind. So you do hear that. So we need there's unity, there's unity, and there's this preaching of unity amidst this presence of intense disagreement between a lot of different groups and sections of society. And so it's a little bit odd to hear, I'll just take myself, for example, to say, hey, Dwayne, like, we need to be more unified and we need to speak unity more often, even though the guy across the street sees you as less than human. But unity is very important. I think, we get back to the age-old comparison between some of the ideas in the march towards civil rights, where some say, there are some that believe that you fight fire with fire. And so if you're being dished out hatred, well, maybe the answer is finally to dish it back in a bigger dose. And I cannot say that I don't understand the concept of that. I mean, if you hit me in the eye, it's almost ridiculous to allow you to continue to do it in the sake of unity. It sounds a bit preposterous. Then you've got the other idea that says, well, love wins, and at the end of the day, that's how we're gonna actually make a difference. And to go to an enemy and go to a person that hates your guts, wants to see you dead, or go to a person that's just completely indifferent about your existence. They don't necessarily hate you, but it is not on their life's agenda to make your life any better or worse necessarily. And to go to them and to try to aim for unity. I think the thing that helped me in reconciling what my path was, even from a non-faith standpoint, just practically asking, what are the options? And so I could either give in to hope, I could give in to despair, or I could decide that it needs to be a war. And I don't know that there are any other options. I've got those three for the most part. I could give in to hope, and hope that somehow continuing to try to reach to even people that may hate me, even people that may want to see harm come to me and my loved ones and the things that I hold dear. I could hang on to hope that continuing to try to reach them with love and with compassion will in the end somehow, if I try and then David tries and another person tries, and through this collective effort of trying to militarize love, that we can make a difference. I can hang on to that. I can give into despair and just throw in the towel, or I can decide, all right, we meet it. We turned it into a war. I think for Black Americans, war is a and King touches on this. It's a silly option, because by sheer statistics, we're outnumbered. We could certainly put up, from a very practical standpoint, a militarized effort. We're outnumbered. And I don't see the value necessarily in trying to, what does it say biblically? Only evil cannot cast out evil. I don't see the value in shedding more blood over this. My goal personally is to have less bloodshed in this country, less hearts broken in this country, is to end the spilling of blood of Black men and women and children. And so for me, just from those three, I feel like the whole reaching across the aisle, the whole reaching for unity, the attempt to continue to try to bring people together, even in the midst of so much hatred, out of the given options, from a practical non-Christian standpoint, it seems to be the most logical option, is to try to win the day with love and hope. And in some way, somehow find the courage to continue to do it in the face of all of the adversity. And thankfully for me, some very great examples of that have been set. You look at the SNCC sit-ins, when they sit at a lunch counter and are literally having their heads cracked open over it. You look at the bus rides where these buses are being torched and set on fire. You look through history at people that have continued to try to fight this fight, where cocktails are being thrown through windows and houses are being set ablaze, and somehow, some way, I think Black people in America have this going for them, that there is no better version of an American that I can find, no better example of what it means to continue to fight for justice, for liberty, for peace, for unity, than the patient Black man and the patient Black woman that continues to long suffer, that continues to fight, that continues to hang on to it and say, this can be done. I think that's worth continuing for.
Thank you, Dwayne.
Yeah, thank you.
David, for you?
Yeah, the Christian hope in Jesus is just bound up with unity. As distasteful as it is for our culture right now, you can't avoid it if you're looking at Jesus. But I think the kind of unity that's really distasteful for us is the one that's really rooted in compromise, and that's not what Christian unity is about. Christian unity is costly unity, right? There's a kind of compromise that can come really cheap, and that's, let's just barter for what's important for us. But that's never been what Christian unity has been about. It's always been about a compromise that is actually really costly. And you see that in the life of the disciples. They were as socially and politically at odds as anybody in America. I think that's safe to say. And yet, on the other side of the crucifixion and the resurrection, they just taught unity for the rest of their lives. And so there's something there for us, I think, for us to learn, as a white person in this dialogue, in the cultural dialogue. When I think about costly unity, I really am, I don't think you want to be overly prescriptive, but really just to look at yourself and go to the cross and say, in what areas do I need to confess and repent, because I've come to love certain people in my neighborhood and they're struggling. Because of my mere presence, I'm oppressive to them. And so I don't think we should look at at unity and say, you need to be united to me, but to be able to say, how am I causing disunity in this community? And how do I go about, by going to the cross and confessing and turning away from those things that that I worship, that allow other people to live lives that are, bound up with suffering and bound up with thinking about what white people are thinking and doing. If that makes sense. So I do think that there's unity there, but we can't avoid it. And yet I don't think it's unity that is actually the kind that is, I don't think it's bound up with compromise. And I think if we actually live that way, we will be a powerful witness to the world. So not overly prescriptive, right? But that's the call.
Unity that comes at a cost.
Unity that comes at a cost.
Yeah. We've only got like 3 minutes left because I am a stickler for time, and as you both have experienced. But it does look like our Slido worked. We got a couple of questions in, which is very exciting for me because I do love new technology. And so the most popular question, and this one would be for you, Dwayne. At one point you shared that you hit a very low level of hope. Was there a particular part of the film that was especially cathartic for you to process?
I think as a whole, it would probably be the moments with my daughter, because there's a hope that comes from, out of all of the pain, out of all of the heartache, there's a hope that's there that little by little it might just be better for those two girls of mine, that tomorrow could be a little bit better, could be a slightly better world for my children's generation. And I think if there's a reward in it, or anything that I would consider cathartic at all, it would be just thinking along those lines, that somehow through the recognition of all of the tribulation, that in the end, confronting this head on will actually make things better for my children.
Super powerful. And then one question, because we had my question answered. Did the production of this film have a particular impact on the actors and crew you're working with?
I've gotten, some phenomenal feedback from the cast of the film so far. I really am looking forward to having more of those conversations with each of them. But I think it certainly varies. Mikey, one of the gentlemen that was one of the black men in the scene with that confrontation, the day of the filming, he shared with me that just the day, if it were not that day, that his cousin had just died, had just been murdered. And being able to connect with him on that, there was this wonderful conversation had afterward of a feeling like, as much as his heart breaks for his cousin, and my heart breaks for the young men and women that I've seen that have lost their lives in some of these streets, that some context had been added to why those streets exist, how they got there, and to hopefully end this very, very silly and very harmful concept of Black on Black crime. And so there's this wonderful bonding moment for he and I there. I think there's been a ton more of that for the cast and crew as a whole, who have come back and said that I think one of the most common things is that they now have a tool to be able to use for some of these conversations with the producer coming back and saying, hey, I've got something to take to my dad, or someone else in the crew saying, Grandpa, I think I know how to reach grandpa now. So it's been super varied and super, super powerful.
Wow.
Yeah.
Not surprising.
And the impact is continuing, Dwayne. You know, I think even just watching it multiple times, there's just more and more each time that the viewer gets from it. So again, thank you so much for sharing your story. I mean, this is the end of the formal program, but I do know that, Dwayne, you did want to have like an intimate conversation with some of the folks here, and I don't want to lose the opportunity to at least have 10 minutes where you can say hello to folks. So I thought I'd end the formal part of this so folks who do need to drop off can drop off, and then maybe we could just, even for 10 minutes, just have a chat, and we can go out of spotlight view, and you can see who's in the room and you can say hello. But just in terms of the formal part of this, there was so many powerful questions, some specifically around filmmaking. And Dwayne has been so kind, to also offer to be contacted if you'd like to reach out to him directly. I'm going to put some contact details up. I'm obviously not doing it in present mode, but yeah, you can just go through his website, blackthoughtsfilm.com. And Dwayne has said that he's happy to respond directly to any questions and he didn't get a chance to touch upon. And then we have our Storefront Church link there as well, which is a Linktree link, which I think Justin's going to post for us for both those sites. And then we also have a feedback form that we would love you just to fill out. It should take you a couple of minutes. One, just about this event, but we're thinking about future events, and there were so many suggestions around topics that you wanted to cover. Unity, reconciliation, and what that even looks like was one of them. Race in the church, theology of racial justice, how to expand the conversation beyond black and white. Even some kind of conversation around some basic terms around racism, discrimination, colorism, and then more specific ones around actually how best to be an ally and continue this conversation with the people in our various spheres. So we'd love you to just share your thoughts, and if this was interesting, we'd be encouraged to do something similar. But Dwayne, how about if let's see who's in the back gallery, and we can.
I can just call on people.
Yeah, you can.
There's a lot of smarties in this crew.
Yeah, Dwayne, I don't know whether you recognize folks.
I recognize so many people. I just want to climb through the screen and oh my God. And again, just I can't say it enough, just how much it means for each of you guys to be here, and how much hope that gives. And this has been, I spoke to David and Chantal and Bertha on several occasions. And I wondered for a moment if I just scared them away, because there's this roller coaster that happens where one day it's like, we're changing the world, look, it's happening. And then the next day, you realize that things are very slow moving. And so just this seeing these faces, it's so affirming and it's so encouraging, and it's fuel in the tank to keep the fight going, the very, very difficult fight. And it's exciting to think that there's so many humans in so many different parts of this globe that are a part of that fight. And I said to Rachel, who's here with me through text earlier, I feel like there's this army that I'm linking up in arms with, who is, and people in that army have been fighting the fight on their front, and I can join them. And they're people that are linking up in arms with me to help the specific fights that I've been after. I know Ben is just, geez Louise, every time I look up, Ben is like spreading the word and making sure that as many eyes have been on this event as possible. And so just want to say a special thank you again for all of that, Ben. And for all of you people that I've never met before, I hope to be able to meet you one of these days, and I hope to be able to break bread with you one of these days when all the craziness is over.
Dwayne's going to come to New York, and we're going to all show him around. He doesn't know that you guys know everything about this city and all the great places to go. So it'll be great.
Yeah, and you should feel free to unmute yourself and say hello to Dwayne, or if you have any other comments or questions.
I could probably go down just like little block to block and just express like how much each of these, some of these faces mean. But I think the most the thing I would like to do most, if we got a couple more minutes, is if anyone had another question that we might be able to, just in the last few seconds, really grab and converse about. I would love that, David, if you're open to it, for the if we've got what five left that we're going to hang out.
Yes.
Maureen here. I've got a question. I've watched it several times now, but this time I was really struck, Dwayne, how several times you mentioned the rejoinder that you hear: racism doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. And the more I work in this area, I'm hearing it more and more, and very disturbingly, I'm hearing pushback from white evangelical Christians about, well, no, racism really doesn't exist. That's in the past. How do you recommend, Dwayne, you know, how would you recommend somebody like us on this call handle that?
Well, Lorraine just like drops the one of the the heaviest questions ever, and it's such an important question. First of all, Lorraine, thank you so much for all that you've done to encourage my family along the way. Man, I think each situation is a little bit different. Sometimes we'll hear those sorts of comments come from a family member. I think that has a different sort of a plan of attack to it. Sometimes you hear those sorts of comments in the workplace that has a slightly different plan of attack. And I think making sure that we are very, very wise and strategic in how we respond to that, with who and with whom, really plays a big part in actually making a legitimate difference. I read this phenomenal article about addressing those sorts of comments with family, and how something as there are these two things that were that were proven to be really, really helpful. One was appealing to the best of them from a personal standpoint. And so say it's grandpa, racism doesn't exist. And this denial, you could try to hit him over the head with history, but immediately you've probably lost them. There's no interest in history. And so in that case, you appeal to your personal relationship with grandpa. Grandpa, I've always seen you as a strong man, as a good man. I've seen these values in you. And before you know it, through this this method of trying to, I think biblically it talks about love heaping the coals back into the person's lap, and meeting that animosity with something positive first disarms them. And so I think that's really important, to disarm some of the people, so that you go into the conversation in a way to where it's no longer a fight. I'm not fighting you over this. I've appealed to the human in you first. And then from there begin to draw upon that as a reason for why they need to take a deeper look. I think that's also applicable in the workplace. Although in the workplace, you don't have necessarily that family history to draw upon. Whereas like with grandpa, you could say, you could pull up a memory. I remember when you taught me this as a kid. And that stuck with me, and that was a positive thing. And you taught me to be a good human and to get out into, it made me want to be a better person. Whereas in the workplace, you're a bit more detached, and you've got to be a bit more like a ninja about it. And I think in some of those situations, man, some of those people, to even engage in the conversation is actually going to move in the wrong direction with them. There are some people that literally, there's the best thing that you can do is to say, I respectfully disagree with that. I'd like to have a conversation with you if you like, but maybe we shouldn't. And then there are others where little by little, you start this process of being able to connect with them on a very human standpoint and getting to know them, and over time wearing them down with a relationship that can travel into a better conversation. All that said to say, I think in workplaces and with people that we don't know as well, it's much harder to have some of those conversations, because even with someone that we really do have a great relationship, unpacking whether or not racism exists is just not something that can happen in a short conversation. It takes looking at history and the whys and the whens and the hows and the wheres. And so outside of real relationships with people, it's very, very difficult to translate. So yeah, I think the short answer to all of that rambling is relationship is going to dictate how that's addressed.
Hey, Dwayne. Cool. Sorry. I wanted to just kind of add something to what you're saying, and in response to this, for me, this was a new experience in 2020 when all of this racial injustice is coming up. Growing up primarily in white communities, in the white evangelical church, to kind of answer from my end what she was saying, I think there's two folds that people get stuck on. And one is it's ugly, and people don't like to face ugly, especially if they find the ugly in them. And I think this was the first time I made the statement. I said, this is the first time in my life I looked inward in order to repent rather than justify. I'm not a racist. I have these friends and instead said, no, wait, what lives in me? And I think that that's a really hard transition for people, because there's such ugliness around it that people don't want to believe that it lives in us. And that repentance, first of all, in our own lives is the first step. And that's been talked about a little bit here. But the other thing is, I think, especially primarily for white America, it's, if I don't see it, I don't have to do anything about it. And I don't really know what to do about it. So if I don't see it, then I don't have to do anything. And I'm sitting pretty good, so who cares? So I think that those are, that I've seen. And as I have pressed this conversation, it's not bad people. It's not people that don't even, it's just, it's such a hard place to open themselves up to. And it really takes humbling. And it also takes an opportunity for discomfort. And I think that those are things people don't naturally like. So I think so when you're having these conversations, it takes a lot of patience too. It's kind of a conversation that's got to keep coming up, not press too much, because you got to allow for the Holy Spirit to do that work that starts in the person. That's the change within that person. And then you can do all the other steps and all the So anyways, that's been my experience in this, and that it's been a different experience looking at racial injustice compared to other times in my life that it's arose. But anyways, just to add on, because someone asked me, I'm sure they wanted my opinion.
Oh man, I want to introduce everyone to an incredibly important person in my life. That lovely woman is Rachel, that I met in the gymnastics world, and she and her husband John, I think, epitomize one of the things that I spoke about very briefly as we were trying to talk about practical ways to address racism. And one of those practical ways is in getting out of our bubble, connecting with people, learning to love on people, building relationships with people, and through relationships, gaining access to the heart. And I just don't know very many people that are better at doing that. You would think that John and Rachel are some of the wealthiest people on the planet based simply on how much they give of themselves. The giving just never, it's give and give and give and give and give. And do I have more to get? And let's give that too. You know, it's there. And I think that there's something incredibly important about Christians in general, that where we have to tap into that as part of the Great Commission, that we are commanded to go out and seek and save. And there's no way to seek and save. You can't get to the heart without getting to the person first. And the way you do that is by connecting and being essentially a servant. And so just to give you guys an introduction to those lovely humans. And I love what she is saying there, because I think each person, as we try to figure out how to have these conversations, part of what we have to do is realize who it is we're talking to. There are some people that have racist ideas in their hearts and in their minds that don't even know that they exist. They have no idea that they're there. There are some people that have racist ideas in their hearts and their minds, and they know full well that they exist, are proud that they exist, and very strongly want to make sure that those racist ideas and motives are upheld in every way, shape, and form. And how we navigate those conversations with each of those people are certainly going to be very different. And I think that the type of person that Rachel was referring to there, that, you know, sometimes it's like, it's just this, there's a group in society that is beginning to have those hard conversations with itself, and seeing that nastiness and seeing that ugliness and figuring out how to root it out, and figuring out how to bring it to the surface and deal with it and look at it in the eye, and then be able to go back out into the world. And I think in helping people do that, one of the really, really awesome things that we can do is to be open ourselves in conversations, to be vulnerable ourselves, to admit that, okay, hey, like, it's not just you. I've had racist thoughts. And as I say that, I think it's also important to get rid of this idea that Black people can't be racist. It's a myth. It's a total myth. And I will be one of the first ones to say it. I have struggled with racism, because essentially what racism is this idea that race is tied to some sort of either behavioral traits of a certain people, or that race dictates a hierarchy in people. And when we want to talk about behavioral traits, I don't know that it's an uncommon thing for people to think about terms like talk white. Oh, he talks white. She talks white. He acts Black. Those sorts of things, those are racist ideas. And I think when we can start to unpack that and admit that, oh my God, like, this vile thing in America has even entered me, it makes us so much more able to look deeper into selves, figure out where else it is in there, and then have conversations with other people. And as we talked earlier about disarming some people, there's few things that disarm a fight faster than being vulnerable. And so just love, like, the things that she brought up there.
Dwayne, there was a question that I forgot to ask in the main group, and maybe this could be a wrap-up question. Tell us about any future projects that you have. You're always working on things, and so I'd love to hear what you've got planned.
Yes, and there's so much happening. There's this really incredible guy on the East Coast that reached out, and he's doing some tremendous work with trying to dig through history to find historic sites where civil rights progress has been made, one of which was the church where the I am a man signs were made for the march that Martin Luther King did, the very last march that he did. They've gone in and they've restored that church and put out an I am a man mural out in the front of that church. They're going across the US finding landmarks like that and trying to make it easier for people to sites of positive history in this fight. he is in partnership with some really great people that have like unearthed all of these incredible sites that tie into the Underground Railroad. On Juneteenth, they're doing this massive celebration of some of these landmarks, and they've asked if Black Thoughts could become a stage play to invite people to a live viewing of on Juneteenth. And initially, I was just completely turned away by the thought, because I think just even watching it tonight with you guys, it was very difficult for me to get through it. So it's like, oh, how do I do that in person? I'd be a mess. I wouldn't get through 5 minutes of that. But I think the idea, the more I think about it, it becomes more powerful. The idea of people being able to physically get into a space together, and to get into this dark room and just sit and ruminate together with these thoughts in a very practical way. And maybe we could play on the sounds and the smells and the experiences of some of these thoughts. And I think it could be really powerful. So that's in the works. I've been reached out to about somehow turning it into a museum experience. The talks on that are still in the works. I'm not exactly positive of what that will entail, but super intrigued by that. But also, Black Thoughts was brought about because there were 2 scripts that I had written previously that we couldn't shoot because of COVID and because of all of the financial implications that came from that. And so I think what I'm dying to do is to shoot one of those scripts titled Numbers, that touches on what we all kind of called the Black Wall Street of the past, looking at what that potentially looks like, trying to recreate that in present day. The hurdles with that are that making films, unlike writing a book, take a tremendous amount of collaboration, take a tremendous amount of money. And so trying to partner with the right people with the right hearts is obstacle number 1. And then getting those dollars together to get those films shot is obstacle number 2. And then obstacle number 3 is still the presence of COVID. And so seeing how we can navigate around that with testing and things like that to get those films shot. And then lastly, there's some ideas for turning Black Thoughts into a feature film. There's been some conversations that the production company has had with streaming services like Netflix and things like that, where it sounds like there's some interest in Black Thoughts if we can stretch it to a full feature length, which I don't think would be terribly hard to do because we tried so hard to keep it short. And so to be able to really just rest on some of those topics a bit more and add some more context, I think would be really, really cool to do.
Wow. Thank you, Dwayne. Will you come back even when you're famous? You know?
Oh, man. I think from now until the end of time, yeah, this kid from the south side of Chicago is just hoping to somehow like leave a better legacy than I was taught to leave. And I hope to become very, very rich in the things that matter, and compassion and empathy and love. And I think if I can do that, we'll be all right.
Yeah. Thank you, Dwayne. And we can't thank you enough for just the privilege of you being here. And I'm going to give the last words to David to wrap up.
If it's okay, I'd just love to close in prayer. Can I do that? Is that all right? Would you join me in prayer? Heavenly Father, I thank you so much for Dwayne and your call on his life. And Lord, there's so many lessons for us to learn here, not just about the practical things, but how do we answer your call on our lives in this area? And so, Lord, as I pray specifically for Dwayne, I also pray that you would inform each of us. Lord, we lift Dwayne up to you and his work. We pray your protection over his family. Lord, I pray that for all of these future opportunities and projects, you would give him the courage that he needs to follow you. If that is to make a theatrical, to do the play version, then give him what he needs to do that. Develop new scripts, Lord. Would you provide resources and creativity, and that you would continue to sharpen and strengthen his very unique voice. And so I thank you for him as a friend, as an important voice in our culture, and I pray that it would be amplified. But we thank you also as a brother who's come and taught and led, and really has done it in a way that Jesus would have done, and that is out of vulnerability. And so, Lord, I pray that for all of us, let us all go forth in that same manner, with the same message, to love others sacrificially, so that our lives might decrease, so that other lives may increase. And would you put in us righteous fire to speak truth into the world with love, but to push back against evil and injustice, whether it's in individuals, or we experience it as individuals, or in the systems in which we live. So Lord, we just offer all this up to you. Teach us what these things mean. We pray this in Jesus' name.